Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Doug Flickner, and I am your child's 8th grade math teacher. And thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I appreciate that. I just want to take a moment to start to say how proud I am of your children and how proud I am of you as adults. And this transition to online learning has been amazingly difficult and challenging and rigorous, and it's asked the world of everybody. And I know that the kids are making just amazing sacrifices right now by being at home and away from their peers. And I know that we've asked them to think about learning in a totally different and independent way that they've never had to do before. I also know that the sacrifices that you're making as in your households right now are just absolutely amazing. And we're really stepping up as Americans and dealing with this in a very, very wonderful and responsible and in a way that we need to be thinking about and remembering over time. Some of you parents out there have had to make amazing sacrifices where you have to stay home, and some of you some of you are making sacrifices where you have to go to work, and some of you are, it's just been really hard for all of us. And I just want to say thank you for the love and patience that you've shown your children, for the love and the patience that you've shown your teachers and your school. And so I just want to take a moment to say thank you for everything that you've done. It's definitely worth noting. It's definitely worth remembering all that we've done together. So I wanted to talk about what the purpose of math class is before we get going too far, because a lot of kids are confused about, and even adults are confused about, what the purpose of math class is. The purpose of math class is not to raise children to grow up to work in some white sterile room where they sit around all day on chalkboards and solve equations. Like, that's not the purpose of math class. That's not what we're trying to build here. Our kids that can go sit in a room and solve problems. There's 8 mathematical practices that I focus on in my classroom and that we focus on at all grade levels. And those 8 mathematical practices are persevere in solving problems, look for solving problems, to reason abstractly about problems, construct arguments and hear the arguments of others and weigh the arguments of others, to model something with numbers, to apply numbers to solve problems, to use the correct tools, attend to precision, look for structure, look for repeated reasoning, and all of these mathematical practices that we use are valuable in every industry out there, in every professional job setting. Those mathematical practices are necessary, and that's what we're trying to teach in this classroom. Yes, and we're doing that through equations, but what we're looking for patterns, looking for arguments, looking for repeated reasoning, and looking for hearing other people's arguments and being able to work together. And that's the purpose of the math class. With that said, I have to put grades in the grade book, and I want to talk a little bit about grades. And grades are just such a nebulous concept out there. And in middle school, I don't know why we have these grades, but a grade doesn't necessarily measure how well your child can do any of those mathematical practices. Grades are different from class. For example, if I said that your kid got a C in some class, you'd say, well, is that a good grade? We'd have to say, well, which class are we talking about? Are we talking about PE, or are we talking about language arts? Or are we talking about math? So a C doesn't always mean the same thing. And so that's why I don't overly love grades. I thought grades were better in elementary school when you got a 3 on an assignment. Like, you knew what a 3 meant, and you knew what a 2 meant. Like a 2 means it was almost good enough, and a 3 means it was good enough. So a 3 means the same thing in PE as it does in math class, as it does in language arts. So that's a better way. So I try to think about grades in terms of, like, on a scale of 1 to 4, what do those mean? Because that's something that we know means the same thing in all classes. With that said, I have to convert that to a letter grade, and I want to talk about that. This weekend, I'm going to enter in probably 6 grades into the grade book, right? And all these grades are for participation only. So at this point, your kid's grade should be 100%, and almost nobody's is, right? And it doesn't mean that they can't do math. It's important that we know that. What it means is that they didn't understand an assignment in some capacity, or they couldn't get it all together, or they couldn't get their schedule together, or the worst has happened in some capacity, right? So when you see that grade in the grade book, I don't want you to worry about it. What I want you to do is to be a mathematical thinker and look for problems in there. So if they didn't understand how to attach a notes, I'm not worried about that 0 in the grade book. Moving forward, we want to say, okay, well, how can we fix this in the future, right? If they didn't understand how to take a quiz, a lesson quiz, and how to show their work, then it's okay. But we need to know moving forward that that's something that has to be fixed. At the end of this first unit, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to delete like the whatever, the 10 lowest assignments or whatever, like the 10 zeros that are in the gradebook, I'm just going to delete those, because all they're measuring right now is how well your kid understood the process at the beginning of the year. It doesn't mean that they understand the math. If your kid has a 0, it doesn't mean they don't understand math. It means that they didn't understand how to access that problem. So don't worry about grades, and don't worry about having your kid go back in time and then fill in those zeros that they didn't do. You just want to know that those zeros are there, and then you can say moving forward, well, what can we do to fix that? So don't stress out about that. I am going to leave them in there until the end of our unit, just so you know where the holes were, so you can see how well your kid is activated in math class right now by looking at that grade and say, okay, my kid, how come my kid has a 0 on this notes? Well, maybe we don't have a good schedule, or maybe my kid didn't understand how to attach it or whatever. So just spend some time looking at that and knowing what those grades mean. It doesn't mean that they can't do math. It means that they're struggling with the process right now. And if you need some help with that, reach out to me and talk to me, and I can help you build a better schedule, or there's things that I can do to give you a hand, just so we're clear. We have a quiz coming up this next week, and for the 8th grade, the 7th and 8th grade class, and we have a quiz coming up, in the 8th grade class, and next week in the 6th, 7th class. And I want to talk a little bit about that quiz. The purpose of that quiz is to be able to measure how well those kids have been able to think mathematically. Okay. And while we're doing this, I want you to know that these kids have, access to tools like that you and I have never had. And we need to be very careful about what the function of these tools are. So if you're using a tool to help you become a better mathematical thinker, then that's a good tool. For example, if we're solving equations and one of the equations, sort of falls down to this long division problem, then it's appropriate to use a calculator to help you solve that, that small answer, because the purpose is to be able to solve the equation, not necessarily do long division. So if a tool is helping you think mathematically, then that's an appropriate tool. But if a tool is doing the work for you, then that's not an appropriate tool. For example, if we're adding negative numbers or something together and you're using a calculator to add those negative numbers together, then you're letting the tool do the thinking for you, and that's not an appropriate tool. That's cheating. So we just want to be very cognizant of what the tools are and what the learning objectives are. I'm seeing a lot of kids' work come back, and I think that I'm worried that kids are using tools inappropriately. There's apps out there that kids can use to take pictures of it, and that will just read the picture and give you the answer. And that, of course, is not an appropriate tool at all. That's definitely cheating. So we want to be looking for that and be careful about that. And on this quiz that they're taking, you're going to want to take a moment to, make sure that the kid are not using inappropriate tools like the internets or their phones, or, they can use a calculator to help them out, but not certainly in the 8th grade class, but in the 7th, just make sure that they're using the tools appropriately and not having a tool to do the work for them. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry for the length of the video. And I just want to say thanks again for all the hard work and all the love that you've shown your parents and the staff here at Port Susan. We're just so thankful for everything that you've done and for your children. And I look forward to getting to know you better. Thanks for the time.